And
So,
I think I
right.
could probably just say both, and I mean, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
If you
Yeah,
guys can
that's fine.
share the recording or
Yeah, that's
whatever,
fine.
or
Yeah,
whatever you want to do.
perfect.
Okay, because I will probably talk about them.
Yeah, of course, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, we're doing video?
Well, I was just gonna. I mean, I can do it down here if you don't want.
No, it doesn't matter to me. I
This
just
is
I
gonna
did
be-
not put any makeup on,
No, you're
just
good.
so you
I'll
know.
set
But
it
you
here
can
so we can hear your voice.
I never wear
Does that-
makeup anymore.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. No,
It drives me
Too much of an
nuts.
effort.
I actually worked for Mary Kay to raise money for my nonprofit.
Mhm.
And so, like, I have all this stuff, but today I had a reflexology appointment, and she puts, like, aromatherapy oils on me, so I didn't put any makeup on.
Oh no.
And I was like, I'll do it before class. I'm not going to get it done, but whatever. So anyway, no, I mean,
No,
do
you're
whatever
good.
you
It's
want.
fine.
Whatever
I
makes
just
you
need to hear your
happy
voice.
is okay.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just-
good.
Yeah, if I do a demonstration,
Yeah, they will.
I'll
bring
take a
it up
picture
to
of it.
Israel,
Yeah. I'm Italian, so it's hard to tell when that's coming. All right, so first let me say that definitely the way that people define poverty or homelessness impacts the way that it gets used in public policy. So it definitely impacts the way we talk about it, and that impacts public policy. And so when we say homelessness, or we say poverty, or even when we say hungry, children that are hungry, we don't really know what that means unless it's in a very specific context. We assume everybody knows what that means, but we don't. How does that happen? Well, for one thing, poverty and homelessness can vary at different levels and different standards. For example, someone who has a place to go to sleep at night, and they might not be able to do anything else, might not consider themselves homeless, whereas we would, or somebody else would. Poverty is the same way. To give you an example, it's all class-based, right? And it's all by comparison. So what we think people might be poor in, they might not think that they are poor. For example, money is one way that we define poverty, definitely, and that's the way most people define poverty. But even what level of money do we define poverty with? So someone who makes less than $60,000 a year, I know people who would call them poor, right? Which, by the way, would include me. And I don't see myself as poor, right? Whereas, there's different levels of poverty even on both ends of the scale. On the extreme rich, for example, my brother, who is a 1%er, he has 5 kids, and they all go to this Catholic school that costs $11,000 a year to go to. I know, it makes me sick to my stomach, because I'm like, $11,000 a year could fund my entire nonprofit for several years. I don't even need it. So it's frustrating to talk with him sometimes. But he says, well, what you don't understand is that we're actually the poor people at that school. I mean, he's in a $500,000 home. They own several large vehicles. I mean, I don't look at them as like luxury vehicles, but they're definitely probably on that level, because to fit 5 kids in a car, you need a big car, like a Escalade or whatever, right? So he has this huge home, he has all these things, and you think there's no way anybody would consider you poor, right? But people consider, some people consider him from the wrong side of tracks, like the poor of the very rich, right? The other end of that, there are people who live in a culture of poverty, and this includes homelessness, food insecurity, and money, as well as material objects. There are people who live in a home, and it's dirty or not what we would consider up to standard. There's rain coming through in one of the rooms or whatnot, and they live off of food stamps or off of minimum wage, which is not a living wage, the minimum wage. Or one person in a house of 8 is working, right? And they don't see themselves as poor, whereas somebody else in that same situation would see themselves as poor. So the way that we define poverty would actually impact the way that they would see policy. So I might say, hey, this group of people, they're poor, they need help, they need support, and we need to write, legislation, we need to make policy, we need to start organizations to help them. And they're like, why are you trying to help me? I'm fine. Or other people will say, why are you trying to help them? They're fine. And so you can't get support for things that we, as individuals, think we need to get support for. And when you're trying to convince legislatures that a certain group of people are poor or homeless and need help, you better really have the backing for that. Because if they even have one example of somebody saying, oh no, here's how these people are not poor, here's how these people are not homeless, if we define it a different way, then you end up with no help, no policy, and no support for that group of people. So all definitions, poverty and homelessness included, are based on context, and within that context, culture, the culture of that context. So just like with the classes, class is part of our culture. High class, low class, right? Middle class, if we had that. Whereas, so definitions are impacted by both of those things. There's no way to get around that. So what do we do? What do we do as activists or as politicians or just as sort of citizens to sort of get around that? And the answer is we always go with the extreme, right? Where we say, well, there's no one who would disagree that someone who has nowhere to sleep, no food to eat, and no money in their pocket isn't poor. Well, that's pretty extreme. If that's what you have to be in order to be poor, pretty much nobody is poor. You're defining everybody outside of that. If homelessness means that you don't own a home or rent a home, then that's a significant portion of the population. There's people who live in hotels, there's migrant workers who go from place to place, there's people who live in their friends' homes that don't own or rent. Why would they be considered homeless? So the first thing when defining homelessness, when defining poverty, is what is the culture, what is the context? All right, so you asked me about definitions, and then what was the other thing?
When it comes to defining things, how does it help to define some things but hurt in other ways?
Oh, okay, yeah. So sort of what I was hinting at there, but not being clear with, and it's hard to describe. The reason that most people study communication or study messaging, particularly political messaging, which is what I study, is to figure out that exact question. What is it that we need to say to impact the greatest number of people in the way that we want to impact them? So if we want to, if we have an organization that wants to impact a great number of people in trying to make them, let's say for example, I'll use my nonprofit for a second, be civil, be heard, civility. That's a really high-end value. Most people who are poor or homeless are not talking about civility. That is not an issue that's important to them, right? So there's going to be a certain group that I can work with and a certain group that I can't work with. So the same thing with poverty, the same thing with homelessness. There is, what is she now? The head of the Boys and Girls Club here in town, Trisha Aiken Herzog. She was in my class. She was in my master's level class in social movements. And she went and pitched the idea of the little houses. I don't know if you've heard about this for homelessness and for poverty. The little houses, the little city sort of concept, and just could not get it through. I mean, she had a great plan. For how to organize the movement, how to get them motivated. And the people in the movement were very, very motivated. But when she got to the city level, she hit roadblocks left and right, and that's always going to be the case. But she couldn't get it done. Later on, it was in fact done. They started, I don't know if they've started building them or what, but it got further through city council, further into the system. And she told me about it. I saw her just recently. And I mean, she was in my class like 8 years ago. It's been a long time. But I saw her recently and she said that a corporation had taken over the idea and wanted to do this. Well, why was the corporation able to be successful when Trista and her movement were not? Well, they weren't the right people, right? They needed more support, but you have a corporation who comes in and says, let us do this, and we'll, give you something else, or we'll get something in return from you, or there's some sort of, back scratching going on, or that isn't necessarily bad, but it's definitely probably a compromise for what you wanted to do versus what gets done. And that's actually true of almost every social policy in the United States. We end up going to the extremes to debate it, then we come towards the middle, and then the people who get it done are the people who manage the best resources while at the same time giving not quite what you could have done a different way. So this is why grassroots and groundswell and social movement solutions to poverty and to homelessness generally are not accepted. It's not that they don't work, it's that the right people aren't sending the message. People want to hear from rich people, like government wants to hear from rich people that they're going to solve the poverty problem, right? Well, that leads us back to the completing that cycle, which is that government and rich people don't see poverty or homelessness the same way that the poor and homeless do.
Right.
And now we're right back to not getting anything done. So we constantly go through a cycle of identifying the problem by first defining it a specific way. And if you don't if you don't define it the right way, you're not going to succeed in getting something done or getting anything changed. So, food pantries, Convoy of Hope, for example. You have the Ozarks Food Harvest and you have the Convoy of Hope, right? They do two different things, don't they? The Ozarks Food Harvest sells out of the pantry, or gives away out of the pantry that they get stuff donated to. Convoy of Hope picks up and goes places where there's disasters, and that's how they determine how to give food. To the same exact solution to two very different problems, even though both of them are feeding people, right? It's very, so the homelessness problem and poverty, there's multiple ways to solve those, and depending on whose definition wins out in the public discourse is the one who's going to win in changing the policy and changing the issue. For example, in Springfield, Springfield and Fayetteville, Arkansas are trying to do the same thing. Both of them don't want people to see the homeless people, don't want people to see poverty. So one of the greatest ways and most obvious ways that you see homelessness and you see poverty is panhandlers, right? People in the street asking for money. And they're in the streets because that's where cars go, and cars will hand money out the window, right? So I've been told, don't hand money out the window, those people make more money than you do in a day, right? We've all heard that.
Yeah.
We've heard, give them money and they'll spend it the wrong way, whatever that means, right? I don't know what the right way is for starving people to spend money, but apparently there's a right way and a wrong way, okay? And they say, we just don't want them to be visible. So we're not going to solve the poverty problem. We're not going to solve the homelessness problem. We're just going to get rid of people being able to see the panhandlers. So Springfield does that by making it illegal to panhandle, right? You're not allowed to panhandle anymore. There's a punishment for it. Make it a crime. Criminalize it, whatever you want to do. Fayetteville, Arkansas has decided we're going to redefine what a street is. Yeah.
A street.
They redefined what a street is. Yeah. And then, no panhandling on streets is a lot easier to vote for than, criminalize all panhandling.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So the public is very likely to vote on, oh yeah, I'm fine with that definition of street, And so that's a very real example, very concrete example of getting at what you all are talking about. We are able to define things inside or outside of our realm of concern, however we want. You know, I moved here to the Ozarks. It's, you know, one of the poorest regions of the country. I come from the Appalachians, one of the poorest regions of the country. I've lived a lot of places that are very rich, that have a lot of money, right? When I moved to Springfield, I'm like, just give me the cheapest apartment. It's just me and my cat, just wherever, right? I'm not concerned about much. I lived out of the city limits, so I wasn't voting on city issues, right? Just clean my road when it snows, you know, which it turns out the county did, but the city didn't. So I was in the wrong place. But when I got married in 2014 and inherited 2 children, all of a sudden it was like, oh crap, what school district am I in? Where do we move to be in the right school district? Where do we move to have the right sidewalks? I mean, walkability, you know, which here on campus we have the walkability project out of the Zone 1 project over at the Community Center, the Center for Community Engagement, excuse me. So, you know, just being able to, all those things that I think about for my child, because I've got plenty of money. I'm not rich, but I'm not hurting, you know. So are there sidewalks for my child? Can they walk to school? Are the schools good? Are they gonna get mugged? What's the neighborhood like? I mean, someone who lives in Zone 1 or Zone 2 doesn't have that luxury. Someone who is too poor to afford the luxury of living securely, of having a sidewalk, of being able to walk from one end of the city to the other, right? Mm-hmm. So the Zone 1, Zone 2 projects that come out of the Center for Community Engagement, which I don't know if you guys even know exists, but it's just in the bottom of the PSU. They might be good people to talk to too, particularly Alex Johnson. What they do over there is a walkability project to find out if people in Zone 1, which is the poorest area, can walk from their home to a street, or to a store, to a voting booth, to whatever it is that they need, right? If we're artificially blocking people who are poorer from access to bus routes, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So poverty at that point is defined very differently. These are people who have food and they have a house, they have a shelter, but really how well can you live if you can't get to a bus to get to your job, if you can't afford a car, if you can't go to the grocery store because it's not within walking distance, or it's walking that is unsafe and hazardous. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yes, the way I look at it is like a cookie cutter. The definition of something is the cookie cutter. When you place it onto the dough, you have some things inside the cookie cutter and some things that you cut out. And that's how definitions work. And so when we do that, when we define streets a certain way, or transportation a certain way, poverty or homelessness a certain way, what we're doing is saying, okay, this very small amount is included in this definition, and this stuff out here is not, right? I mean, if you have people in an unsafe house with no electricity and no water, are they homeless? Depends, right? I mean, I would call that homeless because I don't find that to be a home, you know? So, I don't know if I'm answering your questions at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
I think you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah.
That's good.
Right.
Maybe that's why Andy sent you to me.
I think that's exactly why Andy sent us.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing. It's pretty depressing when you really figure it out. And like one of the things I'm doing right now that I don't normally do. Normally I come in, I teach, and I leave. That's like my 12-hour or advise or whatever. But that's not true. I run a nonprofit. I'm actually very involved, but normally I don't run political campaigns. But I got on it this year for the District 7 congressional race. So the person who goes to the United States Congress, Billy Long. I'm fed up. I don't know how else to put that. Fed up. I am fed up. The guy has pissed me off to no end at this point. So I really, I became a citizen again and said, hey, I really need to get out there, because being a citizen, what does that mean? I voted all the time. I keep informed. Isn't that enough? Well, not now. Now it's not enough, right? So I want to do something So I actually became involved with his race, and one of the things I do is I'm a policy analyst for him. And the first thing all policies do is define the terms. A mortgage, a bank, or anything at the bank, a car loan, a contract with cable,
Right.
whatever it is, the first thing they do is define the terms. Who you are, who they are, who's included, who's not included, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed, right? So the first thing in all legislation, even at the federal level, is definition of terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why. And you'd be surprised at how many times you have a policy that says we should do this. You're like, that is fantastic. And then you pass it and it turns out it's not doing anything. Why? How'd that happen? Sometimes it's just because of the way they define the terms. I mean, if they define street as pretty much anything with concrete on it, then people can't stand in a driveway and have a garage sale.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Trying to imagine Arkansas without garage sales.
Well, yeah, no, that would be,
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a
that-
loophole for that, but as long as you're giving them something in return, it's a purchase, not a panhandling.
Right. Arkansas wouldn't be Arkansas without garage sales.
Yeah, same here. When I
So-
moved here, I was like, this is weird. Thursday through Sunday, what the hell's wrong with you people?
All we do is garage
It
sales
is.
and yard
The
sales.
online garage sale, worst thing that
That's
ever happened to
big.
me, because I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
yes, I need that. Oh, yes, I need that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Horrible. So anyway, ladies, I hope that helped.
Yeah, I
And,
think so.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I think she nailed it. Yeah.
If you need anything, just email me